What would you do if your church suddenly couldn't pay you anymore? For Pastor John Stange, it sent him on a mission to create multiple streams of passive income through his own online platforms. We'll show you how he did it and how you can too in this episode of the More Than a Pastor Show. Let's get started. Hello, my friend. Welcome to the More Than a Pastor Show. I'm Rich Avery, your host. This is the show where we help pastors, missionaries, and other ministry leaders to grow your income and build financial security. We'll help you take your skills, experience, and ministry know-how and leverage them into sustainable income streams outside of your church through a business or a side hustle that's right for you so you can serve God and provide for your family no matter what. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's great to see you here. If you're new to the show, you can learn more about me, get the show notes for today's episode, and download some free resources to help you grow your income and build financial security. It's all over at my website at morethanapastor.com/55 for episode 55. Hey, do you like what we're doing here at the More Than a Pastor Show? If so, we have a new crowdfunding campaign going to help us cover our monthly expenses like our podcast production, our hosting, and our website expenses. And this campaign is just a simple way that you can say thanks and show your support for the show and help us cover these expenses. If you'd like to get involved and partner with us, put a little money in our tip jar, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Rich Avery. Again, that's buymeacoffee.com/Rich Avery. Or you can look for the link for it in the show notes. Thanks so much for your support. I'm beyond thrilled to have my friend John Stange with us on the show today. I first met John at an entrepreneurial pastors event over a year and a half ago. And as I listened to his story there, I was blown away by all of the ways that John was creating income for his family outside of his church. And he was simply repurposing and monetizing the things that he had already developed or created in his pastoral ministry. And I was amazed to learn that this entrepreneurial journey began for John in earnest one day about 10 years ago when his treasurer came to him with tears in his eyes and said, "Pastor John, I don't think we're going to be able to pay you this week." I can't wait to share John's story with you and what he did after he heard those words in just a moment. But first, John is an author, podcaster, and pastor. He's written over 30 books, and he hosts 4 podcasts, including the Chapter a Day audio Bible and Daily Devotions with Pastor John. Those are his 2 daily podcasts. And then he has 2 weekly podcasts, including Dwell on These Things and Platform Launchers. And his podcasts have been downloaded over 10 million times. John has been serving in church leadership for the past 25 years, and he's the lead pastor of Core Creek Community Church in Langhorne, Pennsylvania. John also leads a membership community called Platform Launchers, which helps members build, grow, and monetize their own message-based online platforms. I've been a member of Platform Launchers for more than a year now, and it's really helped me to take more consistent action to build my More Than a Pastor platform here. More than that, I've grown to love John and the other members I've gotten to know in the community, and the encouragement and support we give each other has finally inspired me to launch my More Than a Pastor online members community as well. I'll talk more about that at the end of the show. But to learn more about John, please visit platformlaunchers.com or desirejesus.com. I'll put the links for those in the show notes. And now let's get to our conversation with John Stange. Hey, John, welcome to the More Than a Pastor Show.
Thanks, Rich. It's great to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you on the show today. It's been such a privilege for me to get to know you over the last year and a half. From the time we were both at the same event, and you were sharing your story about how you were a pastor who got involved in entrepreneurship in many different ways. And and I've had the privilege of being a part of your platform launchers community for over a year now, and that's just personally been a real blessing for me to help me continue to build my platform here. So what a privilege to have you on the show, be able to have you share your story today.
Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for being such an active part in platform launchers. There's a variety of people that seem to take a bigger bite of what we're doing than others, and you're one of those that really participates very consistently, and it's just been exciting to watch all the things you're building because I know it helps a lot of people.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I know you've been a lead pastor for many years, and you've also developed multiple streams of income. When I first met you, my head was spinning like, who is this man and why he's living my dream life? So as a pastor who has several income streams outside the church. So I would just love to know, take us to that moment when you realized that you were more than a pastor, that is as great as being in ministry is and serving your church. You felt that God was calling you to something more.
It's interesting because the story has a definite moment in time when that became clear in my mind, but there's also a gradual buildup to it. When I was growing up, our family had a grocery store, and it was started by my great-grandfather. Then my grandfather took it over from him. My dad took it over from my grandfather. And I think the thought in my family, I don't just think this, I know this, they thought that I would be the next generation of people who owned that business. And so I grew up in a context of entrepreneurial activity. We had the grocery store. My dad also owned real estate that he would rent out. And I was just surrounded by that. The whole concept of figuring out a way to earn income from non-traditional sources. And I had thoughts that I was going to go into some form of business, but I also got really, really serious about my faith starting around the age of 15. That's when I really started to get serious about it. And a lot of people, observing how the Lord had shaped me, started to see pastoral gifts in what I was displaying. And so I was pretty highly involved in my church. I even started speaking at a young age, got involved with summer camping ministry, all that, but I wasn't interested in being a pastor. I had only interest in going into business, and my desire was to come alongside pastors and support them. I always would say I want to be the pastor's right-hand man, but I didn't want to be the pastor because, to be honest with you, I thought that would be a very weird life. And here it is. I've been a pastor now for 25 years, and I will confirm it is a very weird life. It's got wonderful moments to it, but there are other moments that I just have to be straight up and just say, yeah, it's totally weird. On that day or in that context, very weird. And then other times it's totally wonderful. And but eventually, the Lord convinced me that I was supposed to serve in pastoral ministry. And so I thought, all right, I have to set my ambitions and dreams and thoughts aside and focus on this. But the truth is, the Lord created a desire in my heart to serve as a pastor. It wasn't something I was doing begrudgingly. It was something I was doing enthusiastically. He changed my focus. And so I started in 1998. So June 1st of 1998 is when I became full-time. I was a part-time youth pastor for 2 years prior to that, but June 1st, 98 was when I became full-time in pastoral ministry. My initial yearly salary at my first church was a total of $14,000. So for 1998, I still remember one of our board members at that point looking at me and saying, how do you live on this? But I was fresh out of college, and I don't know, it's more than I made in college, so somehow I lived off of it. And my wife got a job at a Christian school in the area, and they paid her a total, I kid you not, of $9,000. That was her annual salary for goodness. 1 year. So our total household income was $23,000 in 1998. Wow. So you go through time, in the years, the Lord blessed my wife and I with 4 children. And she really wanted to be able to stay home with them. And I agreed with that. And that's something that I remember thinking, all right, I need to figure out ways that I could make that happen. We bought some rental real estate. I had a second job working at a radio station. I was doing different things like that. And then you fast forward to 2008. And in 2008, the Lord made it very clear to me that he wanted me to replant a church that had just died here in Southeast Pennsylvania. And my wife was on board with it. We moved here. And when you get involved in church planting, there is no guarantee of any sort of income. There was some initial funding that helped pay me a salary, and the people that were partnering with us were trying to be as generous as they could with what that salary was, and I genuinely appreciated that because Southeast Pennsylvania is an expensive place to live. But when you're planting a church, there's no set time period when it's going to become financially self-supporting. And that initial funding that we had stuck around for a few years, but then it went away. And over time, the church got to a spot where it really couldn't pay me a salary, or at least not a full salary. And it was really awkward because the church was growing some, but we didn't have enough in-house funding to really fund what we were doing. For the years prior to that, we were benefiting from outside funding. But then when that changed, we were just trying to figure out what to do. And I'll never forget the Sunday when our treasurer came up to me and he said, and it was a Sunday I was supposed to be paid, as I was paid every 2 weeks, and it was one of those Sundays. And he said to me, and literally he had tears in his eyes. It was very hard for him to admit this, but he said, "We don't have enough to pay you." Now, at the time, I still had a mortgage, and I don't remember if I had any other debt at that point. I think at that point I had retired most of my other debt, but my mortgage was significant. In Southeast Pennsylvania, it's significant. And we also had my mother living with us. My wife and I had four young children, and I thought, all right, there's a lot of lives. There's 6 other people depending on me to come through for them. And I was just told that my one source of income is at least temporarily going away. And the truth is, for the next 2 years, I never knew if I was getting paid or not. That went from 2014 to 2016. I had no idea if I was getting paid. That's a weird spot to be in. And it was a stressful thing for me. Even though I trusted the Lord, it was still stressful. And I remember I got to a point where I had to go to a store, and before I went into the store, a song was playing on the radio that was just helping me wrestle with the nature of trusting in the Lord. And I remember praying in my car before I went in that store, just asking the Lord to show me what I was supposed to do next, because I knew how much time it took to pastor a church. I knew that I needed that time and couldn't easily just get a traditional job doing something else and still have the time I needed to lead this church. But I also felt led to continue serving in this capacity. And I just asked the Lord, you called me to this, so please show me what you want me to do. How am I supposed to raise an income for my family? I'm willing to do what you show me. I just don't know what to do. And the first thing that he led me to start thinking about was writing books. I started writing books, and by God's grace, those books started to make sales, and that helped fund our income. And I started doing voiceover work, and that helped pay our mortgage as well. And so that was the seminal season, the seminal moment. And from those things, it just led to a whole bunch of other things that have become kind of the entrepreneurial path that I've taken to help supplement my income while serving in pastoral ministry, because there have been multiple seasons since then where the church hasn't been able to pay me in a traditional way, but by God's grace, we've been okay.
What an amazing story of having those interests in entrepreneurship, but then having a clear call to ministry as well. And then how God was able to, in the context of ministry, give you opportunities to use your entrepreneurial instincts and interest to help self-fund your ministry.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned you had a career had some work in radio and also in real estate. It's kind of funny. I've had similar experiences as well. We've had some rental property, and I worked in radio for I think around 10 years as well.
Nice.
Met my wife at the radio station. We were both working there
Perfect.
together. So if nothing else, we always say that was a cool way the Lord brought us together. So
yes.
But it sounds like you began using the skills you already developed. You began writing when you were told that, "I'm sorry, Pastor John, we're not able to pay you this week, and we're not sure what this future is going to look like." You tapped into skills you already developed in ministry, it sounds like, or skills you had developed in the past as well. So do you want to speak to that, like why you kind of chose to go that route?
It was something that I could do that wasn't going to interrupt my pastoral schedule.
Hmm.
So the first real entrepreneurial thing that I got into, well, I kind of got into them at the same time. I mentioned doing voiceover work and I mentioned writing. Voiceover work, there was a man that I'm friends with. He's a videographer. He started asking me to just do voiceover work for certain commercials and stuff like that that he was producing. And so I would record that. They paid very well. And it was a huge blessing to our family. But that I couldn't really control. That was somewhat dependent on him saying, hey, I have another job for you. I have another thing I need you to record, things like that. Something I did have more control over was writing. And at that time, Amazon started getting, pretty creative with what they were doing in the self-publishing world. And so they had created KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing. And I looked at that and I thought, I could write some short Kindle books. I might be able to take some of the content that I've already written in the faith-based space that I've used to teach and preach, and maybe I could convert some of that into books, and maybe I could write some additional things just from scratch. And so I started testing the waters with that, and I was so grateful, but it took off right away. And some of the early books that I wrote started to bring in a decent amount of money per month, sometimes $1,000, sometimes $2,000. And I remember at the time just being so grateful for that. The combination of that with the voiceover work was literally funding our life at that point while the church couldn't pay me a traditional salary. And then that led to a whole bunch of other things that just became this rabbit trail of almost making it a game where I looked at it and I said, I want to see how many streams of income I can develop, and I want to see if some of them might be able to be automatic, almost like something I could do one time, and then I could just hopefully continue to get paid for it for a very long time afterward with really no additional work. And so the books were kind of like that. I was able to write books. Sometimes I would just wake up early and I would write early in the morning, or I'd stay up late and write late at night. I would do it usually on the margins of the day because that's when I had some open time. But then I discovered some other opportunities and started stacking those. And before I knew it, I had multiple streams of online income that had become kind of a significant portion of our budget, even in their early stages.
Would you mind sharing what some of those other streams are? You mentioned the
Sure.
voiceover and the writing. What as you began there, what else? What was the rabbit trail you said that the Lord was leading you on?
Yeah, so I actually keep a list on my phone, and I because I still kind of make it a game, and I'll go through my list in a second here. But the next one that turned into a stream of income, which I wasn't really certain it would at first, was podcasting. During that season where there was a lot of where things seemed kind of up in the air financially, I was also dealing with some discouragement, admittedly, and I know that there are probably pastors listening right now that have dealt with seasons of discouragement in their ministry. It's pretty much par for the course. You just go through those stretches, and it was impacting my ability to sleep at night, which admittedly is not great to begin with, but it was worse than its terrible trajectory already. And I started listening to podcasts at night, especially like sports biographies and things like that, because it allowed me to stop thinking about my own situation, and I would go to bed thinking about somebody else's life instead of my own. And so I started really getting into podcasts and listening to them. And then I thought, I've got this background in voiceover and radio and things like that. I should create content. I know how to do this stuff. So I started thinking, what should I create? First podcast I created was a leadership development podcast. And I started creating that content. It went well. And then after a while, and podcasters that are listening will probably identify with this statement, sometimes you run out of fresh ideas. And I felt like I had communicated everything that I could consider communicating on leadership that fell into the major categories. I could certainly get into some minor categories, but over time, I had started to notice that my interest in doing that podcast was starting to fade. And at the same time, I had an idea to do a different kind of podcast. I had a personal pattern of waking up and reading one chapter of the Bible in the morning before I would allow myself to check social media or email or respond to messages or anything like that. And I thought, well, what if I recorded that? Instead of just reading it to myself, what if I recorded that and created a podcast called the Chapter a Day Audio Bible, and I could read out loud and then have a time of prayer afterward? And I was hoping that people would find that helpful to just familiarize themselves with the Bible. And I also hope that my children would listen to it on the way to school in the morning. And so I started recording one chapter of the Bible a day, and I just started with Genesis and started working my way through it. I'm on my third time through the Bible right now, but that podcast blew up for me. It absolutely blew up. And with that came some crowdfunding where people listening were saying, hey, how can we support the show? Because we know you have expenses to do this. We also just appreciate the time that you're putting into doing this, and you're consistently delivering it every day. Is there a way we could thank you? So I set up some crowdfunding with it, and people were very generous with the crowdfunding, and it was really helpful. So I kept producing that daily show, and the crowdfunding kept supporting my expenses with it, plus gave me some extra that went to our household budget, which was wonderful. After a couple of years of doing that, I thought, I really need to develop a website where my books and my podcasts could all be housed under one umbrella. And so I had owned the domain for a long time, desirejesus.com. So I thought that's going to be the banner, desirejesus.com. Everything will fall under that. Created a book page there, a podcast page, and I added a blog. And for the blog, I started putting my sermon content up there in blog form. And then people started approaching me about advertising on it because it was getting good traffic. And so I put together an advertising page. One of my earliest advertisers offered to pay me $1,200 a month for a banner ad on there. And that really illustrated to me that there was a lot of possibility in advertising on a blog if it was consistently updated. And so then that became another source of income. And so I'll run through the major things on my list here. Sure. All right. So I receive honorariums, so different speaking honorariums, different ministry honorariums. I receive royalties from Penguin Random House because my most recent book it's not even my most recent book anymore because I published a few additional ones, but my most recent traditionally published book was published by them because they thought the downloads for my podcasts, and I host 4 podcasts now, they thought, wow, you have an audience. Those shows are over 10 million downloads now. And Penguin Random House actually offered me a book deal with a nice advance. So that became a source of income, but I get royalties now from that. I also get royalties from Amazon because of the self-published books that I've put up there. I get affiliate commissions from Amazon and a few other sources because I have different videos that I've put up on YouTube and different things I have up on my website that are connected to Amazon's Associates program where they pay affiliate commissions. So I also get YouTube ad revenue because I have 3 YouTube channels, and one of them has been monetized and has some very boring content about house repairs and lawn care and things like that. But for some reason, that one caught on and it turned into ad revenue. I have advertising that I do now to some degree on my podcasts. I signed up to be part of a podcast network, and so they pay me for podcast advertising when different sponsors want to run something on the show. I have a ministry job directory that I earn income from where people pay a subscription fee to post jobs. I have affiliate commissions from Kajabi. I use Kajabi to build my platform launchers site, which I appreciate the mention that you gave to that, where I help people develop online platforms. And Kajabi pays me affiliate commissions when people sign up for Kajabi through my affiliate link. I also have the income I earn from platform launchers itself, and I'm assuming at some point we'll probably even chat more about that, but that has turned into a source of income. And there's multiple streams of income that fall under platform launchers.
Wow.
I still get money from voiceover work, so people still hire me for voiceovers, although I don't do as much of that as I used to, but I do still do some of it. I have some crowdfunding options like Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and then some things I'm doing through PayPal. Let's see. What else? Coaching. So I receive income through coaching that I do, and I also sell courses. So those are some of the major streams of income, and and it's something that I always look at and I think, all right, well, if there's something that I could add to that list that could be an autopilot thing, because some of those things are things that I do once and then I never have to touch ever again. When I write a book, there's nothing else I have to do with it. I just write it, and as long as it's available and it's a useful topic, they usually continue to sell because I've got my podcast leading people to my website. On my website, they find my books. If they find a book that's helpful, they buy it. The links to my books are affiliate links on Amazon. So Amazon gives me a commission on top of my royalty. People using the website realize that there's good traffic there. They pay for the advertising, et cetera, et cetera. And so it basically, over time, I discovered this whole ecosystem of multiple streams of income that could be earned online that allow me to say yes to a lot of ministry. And it allows me to say yes to serving in our church context in a way that is not dependent on an income from the church. The church knows, our elders know, that paying me is optional. They are welcome to pay me. And in fact, I actually think it's right that they do pay me a salary for serving there, because I'm not phoning in that either. I mean, that's I work really hard in my role as a pastor. And so I don't think it's wrong that they pay me, but they also know that the agreement I have with them is everybody else and everything else gets paid first. And I only get paid if every bill is paid, every salary is paid, every insurance is covered, every utility, all of that. And then from the leftover, I get paid. And that means sometimes my pay is delayed or skipped. And so, that it's kind of an interesting arrangement that I have with them, but I'm grateful that that's the case. And I'll say one other thing about it. For pastors that are listening, it's a tricky thing to lead a church because you're leading as the Lord leads you, and there are sometimes things that you do by conviction that may be popular decisions or may be unpopular decisions. And there are times in my pastoral role that I have to make unpopular decisions, but I know that they're the right decision. Now, I don't try and irritate my church. I try to work with our leaders and make decisions with counsel and all of that. But there are times that I have to be the point man who makes a tough call. And the fact that I have other streams of income that support my life and my family, and the fact that through these streams of income, I've been able to eradicate all sources of debt in my life. I don't have a single debt to anyone for anything, house paid off, all of that. It allows me to lead in a way that doesn't get coupled with a lot of fear, because I get to make hard decisions. And I think, all right, worst case scenario, the elders get together and say, you know what, John, you're fired, get lost. And I will still be able to eat. I will still be able to take care of my family. I will still be able to support the ministries that I feel led to support. And I can go to bed at night with a clear conscience, knowing that I led the way I was supposed to lead. And I'll tell you a little secret. In the past few years, that got tested a little bit because of some of the hard decisions churches have had to make in the past 3 years in particular. And there were some hard calls that I had to make, but I was able to make those calls without fear of being able to care for my family financially because of these things being in place.
I have really admired you, and I say I want to be like John when I grow up, and I want to have all of these things. And I think sometimes we compare and say, "Oh, I can never do what John did. Look at how far ahead he is," or "Man, he's got like 8 or 10 or 12. I lost count of these different streams of income." So what if I just want to begin with one thing? What if I'm just trying to figure out, I know I need to do something? What would you say to the pastor who's like, well, I don't even know, do I have permission to begin to create income outside the church? What would you say to that pastor? And then also, what would you recommend they do to begin?
So I'm not big on asking permission for something that I think God's already given you permission to do. So when it came time for me to do these things, I had to do them. Because my main responsibility, even before I have the authority to lead a church, is to lead my family well. So I looked at it and I thought, God's already given me permission to do this. I have to do this. And so So that's how I look at that. I think you already have permission. It's not like you're trying to do something complicated maybe I shouldn't use the word complicated. It's not like you're trying to do something that is outside of the scope of what the Lord allows pastors to do. Because you see the Apostle Paul, how did he fund his ministry? Through tent making, right?
Yeah.
So he wasn't asking anyone for permission for him to be entrepreneurial. He was doing that so that he could be a blessing for the local church. But I'm glad that you phrased the question the way you did, because that's where a lot of pastors, and I know you know this because you interact with a lot of guys, that really is where a lot of guys get stuck. They think, do I have the authority to do this? Do I have permission to do this? I would say yes. Now, there might be someone in your life who doesn't agree with that, but usually those are the type of people that are trying to discourage you and hold you back because they want some unhealthy level of control over your life. Don't give it to them. The people that I interact with that fall into those categories, usually I find myself saying, how can I marginalize that person as far as having influence in my own life? Because all they do is try and discourage me. Anytime I succeed, they seem to try and like put a wet blanket over it. Anytime I try and be a blessing to someone else, they try and find some way to criticize it. And I think, you know what? Life's too short for me to let your voice ring in my head when you're trying to hinder me from doing things the Lord's led me to do. So I try and put that influence off to the side and recognize that, if there's something critical they say that's helpful that I can learn from, yes, I want to learn from it. But most of the time, people like that fall into a category of trying to control a pastor in an unhealthy way. And I don't like that. I've had people do that to me over the course of the past 25 years. And at an earlier season of life, I think I was more inclined to put up with it. And at this season of life, it's not in me to put up with it anymore. And I'm polite about it, but I'm also politely willing to disagree and also politely willing to part friends if anyone tries to hold me back from anything that the Lord's calling me to do. And so that's part of it. If your conviction is such that you have peace at night, knowing that you've got things in the right order, that you're honoring the Lord, honoring your family, and honoring the church in that order, then do what the Lord allows you to do. Do what He opens up a door for you to do. Second thing I would say is this: I'm 9 years deep into what we're talking about here. 2014 was the year this really ramped up for me. I'm 9 years deep. So I'm almost a decade into doing this. And some of these things on my list are things that have come on the later end of that decade. They weren't things I had right away. At first, I only had like one or two streams of income. One was something service-based, so that was the voiceovers. The quickest way to supplement your income is to provide a service based on something you're good at and people like to pay you to do. So the voiceovers fell into that category. And then, I added the books, and they eventually took off. But then a very early thing I was able to add, even before I had all these different things in place, and even before I knew where I was trying to take some of this, was just different forms of crowdfunding. And I did that with the podcast. I just let people know, hey, obviously I have expenses as I'm trying to do this, but if you want to chip in, here's an easy way to do that. And right now people could use things like Buy Me a Coffee to help out with their crowdfunding, or they could set up something with Patreon, or they could even just set up something with PayPal where people could contribute via crowdfunding. And I'd encourage people to maybe just start there, because if you're providing helpful content on a consistent basis, I think there are people who use your content who will want to support you. And through the years, especially in seasons when I really needed the help, there were some people that came along and were just beyond generous with the help that they supplied through some of those crowdfunding sources. And I was so grateful. And the other things that I added in my list, I added over time. And platform launchers in and of itself is something that it's only existed since 2021. So it's only been around less than 2 years.
Yeah.
So some of the streams of income that I listed are connected to that. But even that came about because people were saying, hey, how did you build this online platform that has been something that not only supplements your income, but can quickly replace a traditional income for most people if they delve into it? And it was an idea that came about because people kept asking me similar questions, like, how did you build what you're building? And eventually in time, I realized, I didn't just build a podcast, and I didn't just build a book library, and I didn't just build multiple streams of income. I actually built a message-based online platform. And that really became a wonderful opportunity to serve people in a brand new way that's entrepreneurial, and it's business centered, and it gives me this whole new world that I get to interact with people in. And it's wonderful to watch people succeed and to see how it's been a blessing to their families and their ministries. And I have a strong sense of mission and purpose behind everything I'm doing with Platform Launchers, even beyond developing the platform. The impact it's having on people's lives and ministries is something that really fires me up.
Well, that's awesome. I've been blessed with just the relationships of the people I've gotten to know in Platform Launchers. Of course, first with you and the leadership you provide in the group, but then I don't know, there's like over 100 members now, and it's just so fascinating. People from all different walks of life, different parts of the country, even different countries around the world. But we all feel God's given us some kind of a message to share, or a passion in our hearts that we want to share with others. And you're providing a step-by-step guidance in how to build a platform, how to create content that's helpful for people, and then that will help produce an income for you over time. And I've just been really blessed to be a part of that community.
We're glad that you're part of it too. Like I said, it's interesting when the Lord sends certain people to the group. Everybody has some level of influence on the culture of the group. And I've always appreciated from the moment that you join the group what you add to the culture of the group. So I appreciate that. Your input, your involvement. It's had an overall benefit just on the community that exists there, of people, like you said, from all different backgrounds. And it's not just people creating ministry content. I think a large percentage of the people in Platform Launchers do come from a faith perspective of one degree or another. So we do have that commonality, but then there are other people that don't, but yet like hanging out with people that do. So even from a ministry standpoint, I've noticed that Platform Launchers allows me to interact with some people that I might not have been able to interact with in other ways, because we have the commonality of trying to build message-based online platforms. So that in and of itself is special, and I think has a real redemptive perspective, even from the perspective of the gospel being shared and modeled with people that maybe don't come from our own personal faith.
Yeah, I think that's a great benefit of pastors creating income outside the church. It gets them in contact with people they wouldn't otherwise come in contact with, whether it's a local based business, people in your community, or it's online business and you're impacting people around the world.
Oh yeah,
there's such power in that. What would you say to younger John, now that you have developed all these streams of income over 9-10 years now? Is there something you'd say to a younger you 20 years ago, now that you've experienced all of these things, and maybe that would speak to a younger pastor today that's listening?
Yes, I would say be thinking about multiple streams of income, especially some that are not highly dependent on your time. So things that could be set up and then, forget it. But something else I would definitely say to younger John is avoid debt. Younger John attempted some entrepreneurial things, some of which worked and some didn't work. So it ended up in the end probably being mostly a wash.
Okay.
But one of the things that younger John was very comfortable with was borrowing money to get where he thought he needed to go with different things. And then I became a little too casual with debt. And the interesting thing is I always had a perfect credit score, and I always paid all my bills on time. So I never got to a spot where I wasn't able to pay a bill on time. And I always had a really good credit score. And so that's how people say the game's played, right? Pay your bills on time, have a good credit score. And here's what happened to me. I got to a spot where I realized I am one interruption away from not being able to juggle this house of cards here. I'm not going to, one interruption away is going to make it so I can't pay my bills. And this was even before I got involved in church planting. One of the things that the Lord did in my heart in like 2007, right before I got highly involved in planting our church, was prepare me to start getting rid of my debt. And I became convinced that I had way too many liabilities in my life. And so I decided, I need to drive a simpler car so I don't have to have a car payment. So I got rid of my new car and got something that was a bit older and more modest. I got rid of all my credit card debt. And by the way, it took years to eradicate all this stuff.
Yeah.
But I started following a plan to get rid of my debt, and with the goal that ultimately I would have no debt whatsoever, including no mortgage. And I feel like that allows me to leverage my savings and my income and do all sorts of things now in a very brave way because I don't have a whole lot of overhead. I keep my finances very lean. I do not live an extravagant lifestyle, even though my income has increased exponentially over what it was even just a few years ago. But what that does is it allows us to be more generous with what we do. It allows us to save for our retirement and for the future. It allowed us to pay off our home early. All of these things. It allows us to be a blessing to our children and to our extended family and to our church and all of that. And if I was saddled with a whole bunch of debt, I wouldn't be able to say yes to those things. And there'd still be a thing in the back of my mind that was fearful of something interrupting my finances and making it so I couldn't pay for a financial obligation. I don't owe a single person anything. And a single company, I don't own a bank, anything, nothing. And it took a long time to get there. It wasn't until February of 21 when we got there. So it's only been a little over 2 years since we've been completely debt free. But that's when we paid off our house, and there is no looking back. At that point, I was like, all right, this is a different way to live. And I wish I could go back in time and tell younger me, stay on the plus side with your finances. Don't take on debt. Stay on the plus side and keep investing for the future. And that I would definitely do that differently.
What would you say to an older person? I'm in my early 50s and starting to build in this way, creating income outside church work. And maybe someone's in their 50s, 60s listening. What would you say if people think maybe it's too late, or I'm too old, or I can't figure this out? What kind of guidance would you give for them?
I would say, where do you want to be 2 years from now or 3 years from now? Financially speaking, if we're just talking about the financial part of it, I would say, where do you want to be 2 or 3 years from now? Do you think the you of 2 or 3 years from now is going to be glad that the you of present day does something that improves your financial picture? Don't think of it through the lens of, oh, I'm not 20 anymore. There's no hope for me. They one of the greatest examples of that people often point to is Colonel Sanders, who didn't really get into what he was doing until he was in his mid 60s. And so all the things we know him for, the successful business he built after he was past the age of traditional retirement. And so I look at that. I don't want to be one of those guys who, as my age increases, stops taking chances on myself. I want to treat myself like I'm a young guy that's got a million years ahead of me. And but I also want to think of it through the lens of, what will the me of 2 years from now be glad that the me of today chose to do? Because I want to make that guy's life a little bit better. And there are things that you can build that don't take 9 years. All the things that I built, part of the reason it took me 9 years to build them is because I didn't know what I was doing. I had to learn the hard way. And so I learned the hard way and the slow way. And because I was adverse to spending a whole lot of money, I didn't really pay for mentors early on, but I also didn't know where to go to get them. And in time, once what I was doing started building up, I started realizing there's value to pay for mentors that could save me time. And even when I created Platform Launchers, one of my motivations for creating it was, I thought, I want to help people that feel like they don't know where to go with this. I want to show them systems that'll save them time. And that's also why I made Platform Launchers inexpensive. It's not expensive to be part of it. Some things I look at, they're hundreds and hundreds of dollars to be part of. Some are even thousands of dollars to be part of. I charge $49 for people to be part of Platform Launchers. That is not an expense that most people cannot afford, especially when it saves them time, saves them money, and then helps them to make more money than what they're spending. It almost becomes a no-brainer. And so I look at that and I say, invest in yourself now, so that in a couple of years from now, you look back and you say, yeah, I skipped ahead in line by utilizing, systems or wisdom that other people learn from being in the trenches.
John, I know a lot of pastors and churches are struggling right now financially. because a lot of times we look to COVID and say our people haven't come back yet, or our giving hasn't come back. And yet I'm kind of feeling like, and I think many more people are realizing now, like, we're not going to go back to what life was like before COVID. This is a new season for churches and pastors. So what would you say if a pastor is in a church and they're just not sure what the financial future of the church is going to be like, and what their financial future is going to be like? Do you have any wisdom for like where we're at right now in this day and age for the church and for pastors?
I really would advise most pastors to pray about whether or not the Lord wants them to develop some additional sources of income, because I see this playing out, like you said, in established churches, but also in church planting scenarios and church revitalization scenarios. One of the things that I do in my free time, Rich, is I lead a mission board that helps plant churches in different parts of the United States. And almost all of our pastors that we work with need to be either bivocational or co-vocational, depending on how you want to phrase that. And so for each of them, I'm always encouraging them. I just had a conversation on Saturday with one of them to consider finding additional streams of income that can be helpful for the church. And I know that that's something that you're trying to encourage pastors to consider, but it helps in established churches that feel like they're going through a difficult stretch. It also helps in church planting scenarios. And I think in a strange way, for many pastors, it contributes to their longevity in ministry for a couple reasons. It relieves financial pressure, and it also gives you a life outside of the emotional pressures of the local church. There are certain things in my role as a pastor that weigh me down. When and pastors know that they are the recipient of all the bad news in the world. So everything that is bad that happens to somebody, they tell you about. So if they have a medical catastrophe, you find out about it. If they have an emotional problem or a relational problem or a marriage problem or something with their children, you hear about it. They either tell you about it because they'd like you to be praying for them, which is understandable, or they schedule a counseling appointment with you and you sit with them and work with them through that. And so you're always sitting with people through very, very difficult things. I know for me that the energy that I get to be able to sit with people in the midst of those low moments, while I'm also dealing with low moments in my own life, right? And some of those things don't get necessarily broadcast to the world, but there are difficult things that I, at times, am going through as well, like all people. It helps me to have a world outside of my pastoral responsibilities. So through, some of the things that I'm doing with platform launchers or some of my own business entrepreneurial things, I find myself saying, yeah, I just sat with this family that's dealing with a marriage crisis, but now I get to think about podcasting. Now I get to think about formatting a self-published book. Now I get to talk to somebody that's building an additional stream of income. Now I get to be on the More Than a Pastor podcast, where we're talking about things that can help pastors develop entrepreneurial activities. And I look at that and I think it's so nice for my mind to be able to engage in some of these things outside of some of the burdens that sometimes I'm dealing with. And so I would encourage pastors to think about having a life outside of some of their pastoral responsibilities, even if it's just a small thing. One of my sons is really into woodworking. It does his mind good to have that as a diversion. He's a student in college. College is stressful. He has a diversion. He sometimes will just do woodworking, and it's great. And he gets paid to do it too, which is lovely. I have I have a daughter who's into cutting hair and styling hair, and so she does that. I have another son that's into firefighting. And while he's in the midst of his college career, he's becoming a trained firefighter. I have another daughter who's into language studies, and she helps people learn English that have grown up in other cultures. And so I look at stuff like this, and I think for pastors, it's not a bad idea to have another world that you get to operate in, like a student who has a job outside of their studies, or like I'm experiencing, where outside of my pastoral role, I get to talk about some of these streams of income and entrepreneurial things. I feel like it makes me a better pastor because it helps fill my tank so that I could serve the people that the Lord's called me to lead and serve with a little bit more enthusiasm, because I'm not just constantly weighed down by some of the harder things in life that are on my mind.
Seems like you have a lot of joy where you're at right now in life. You are very generous in obviously your time today and through the platforms you've developed and through platform launchers. I've just seen your generosity over and over in helping people. And you and your wife seem to have so much joy right now, being able to do things and give things you never would have been able to before. So would you just speak about what that's like for you right now at this stage?
It's interesting because in the book of Acts, Jesus gets quoted as having said that it's better to give than it is to receive.
Mm.
And that is true. And it's I'll give you a very specific example of how this plays out in our life in maybe a small way, but it's kind of become a theme for some of the other things. We do find joy in being generous because we know that our Lord's been generous to us. He's blessed us in many, many ways that we don't deserve. And so as recipients of those blessings, we're grateful anytime that he gives us the opportunity to be a blessing to others. But I remember this would have been back in 2006. That was a stretch of time where, I was feeling pretty financially strapped. That was right about a year before I started focusing on the debt side of things that I was dealing with. I wasn't earning that much of an income in pastoral ministry at the time, and I got invited to a pastor's conference, and I went there, and several of my college roommates were also attending this. At this point, we were all pastoring different churches, but we came back to this conference, and we were going to get together afterward. And one of the guys said, "Hey, there's a restaurant right next door to the conference area here. Do you guys just want to grab some dinner?" And I very much wanted to grab dinner with the guys, but I also knew that I just felt like I couldn't afford it. Like I knew that I really didn't have extra money for even dinner that night. And I still went thinking, oh boy, like where's this going to come from? Because I feel like this is creating financial stress. I know I'm only about to spend maybe $15, but I still feel like this is going to hurt. And I sat down, and the whole meal, to be honest with you, I was thinking about it. And then at the very end of the meal, one of the guys, who was one of my roommates in college, he said, "Hey, everybody, if you guys are okay with this and it's not going to be a problem, I really just want a treat for dinner tonight. And would that be okay?" And I remember thinking how relieved I felt that he was willing to pay for that. And I thanked him. And I've often thought about that. One of my favorite things to do when we have dinner with people or we invite people to go out to eat is see if I can grab the bill, especially since the Lord's blessed us financially in the past few years. I try and grab the bill because I remember how much of a relief that felt to me in 2006 when my friend just grabbed the check and he paid for it. And so I look at that and I think one of my favorite things to do now is to just treat people to lunch or dinner or something like that. And it may seem like a small thing, but I remember when it felt like a huge thing to me. And I know that there are times that it's been a blessing to other people. And I think that can just kind of spill out into other areas of life where you just realize it's not about what you keep, it's about what you get to share. And if the Lord blesses you with something, I think oftentimes the Lord blesses us with the resources that he gives to us so that we could be a blessing to other people. And I'm grateful for opportunities he gives to us to do that. And I'm also grateful for resources that during the season he's entrusted to us. Because here's the other thing I know. The things that he's blessed me with, they could go away in a day.
Sure.
But I still have him. And I always feel like if you have Jesus, you have everything you need. And that truly impacts my perspective, whether I have financial resources or not. The fact that I have him means that I truly have everything that I need, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm glad that sneaks out in just different areas of my life, or that's something that you would look at and say, "Hey, I kind of noticed this about you."
Yeah.
You're basically noticing something that the Lord is impressing upon my heart to prioritize. So thank you for the kind words related to it. But ultimately, in the end, he's the one that put that desire there, and so I want to honor him with it.
That's great. Yeah, praise the Lord. That's awesome. Well, John, thank you for being on the show today. I really appreciate you sharing from your personal experience and some of the challenges and trials and some of the joys and successes that you've had. And I hope every pastor comes away from this conversation realizing what could be possible for them, that they don't have to be relegated to the situation they may find themselves in right now if they feel locked in a place and where they don't have room to move and any margin in their life or in their finances. And you've painted a picture of what could be possible if you begin to invest some of the skills and talents God has given you, even talents you've developed in ministry and used in ministry in other ways outside the church, and how that could create more for their family. So just really appreciate you being here to share that. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with? And then could you let us know if people want to follow up and want to connect with you, learn more about platform launchers, or just learn more about what you're up to? I just love for you to be able to share how we can find you online or get in touch with you.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to have this time to spend with you and with your audience. It's truly a privilege, and I appreciate everything that you're doing with More Than a Pastor, because this is a message that's needed more now than ever, it seems. And if people want to follow up with me, there's a couple places they could go online. They want to check out the faith-based content that I'm putting out there. They could go to desirejesus.com, and they'll find the books and the podcasts and the things that I'm creating in that sphere. And then if they personally have a desire to build an online platform and want to figure out a system that will help them take a message that they feel passionate about and turn that into something that serves an audience and then hopefully provides an ongoing source of income, they could just go to platformlaunchers.com. I have a variety of things there that they could check out. And there's also, I have a platform development planning guide if they're trying to figure it out. And it's just free on the website, right on the homepage of Platform Launchers. And I'd love to share that with as many people as think might be able to use it, and help them hopefully launch what they're doing into the online space that allows them to serve an even bigger audience.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'll be sure to place those links in the show notes. So if someone's listening while being on the treadmill or driving in their car, you can easily find those by going to the show notes for this episode. So, John, thanks again for being on the show. Thanks for all that you've shared and for your example, and just really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Rich.
Wasn't John great? What an amazing story about how God helped him take a huge problem, the prospect of not having any income from his church, and turning it into multiple streams of passive income for his family, and how it birthed within John a passion and a calling to help others learn how to navigate those situations and be able to create passive income streams for themselves. Before we go, there are a couple of things I'd like to highlight. First, did you notice how John has largely focused on monetizing the skills and resources he's already developed in ministry, like writing, speaking, and coaching? And second, did you notice how much of what John creates is not original with him? I mean, John is not one of the writers of the Bible, and so he did not create the Bible. But he's taken that resource and he's taken the scriptures, just reading a chapter a day, and has found a way to monetize that. He's taken the Bible and created sermons and lessons and devotionals, and has found ways to repackage those into books and be able to monetize them. And I think that is available to everyone. We don't have to think that we have to create something new or something from scratch, but to find ways to repackage things that are already familiar, things we already have at our disposal. And maybe you're a pastor who thinks, well, that sounds easy for Pastor John, but I don't know that I could ever do something like that. I want to encourage you and invite you to look at my More Than a Pastor Members Club. It's a brand new online community I'm creating. You can find it at morethanapastor.com/membership. I've always wanted to create a place, a community, where pastors, missionaries, and other ministry leaders can come together to get tools and resources they need to know how to create a business that's right for them, to get support and encouragement from others who are in the same boat that they are, and then also a place to get coaching and guidance in a group format to know how to forge their pathway forward to creating income outside the church. So I've had that vision for a long time, but I didn't always have the courage to be able to get it launched or to know exactly what it should look like or what it should include. And I've realized that I need to stop dragging my feet and just begin to build it as I go, and to invite people like you to join in at the ground floor level and help me know how to shape it, what resources need to be included. So I'm offering a founding members opportunity. And you can join the More Than a Pastor Members Club at the lowest price ever. In fact, you can name your own price. Pick how much you'd like to pay each month. And the amount you decide on today when you join is the price you'll pay forever for as long as you're a member. Because like everything in life, prices go up as value goes up over time. And so I'm sure this will be probably up to like a $49 a month membership, but you won't pay that. You can name your own price and pay what you want to pay to be a part of this, because I wanted to create something that was accessible for every pastor, missionary, or ministry leader. So if that's of interest, to learn more and to join as a founding member and help me to create this thing, you can join at morethanapastor.com/membership. And if you want to get in touch with John, maybe even join me in his Platform Launchers community, I'll put the links that John shared in the show notes, and you can get those at morethanapastor.com/55 for episode 55. Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much again for joining me. And I know it's a long episode, but thanks for sticking with it till the end. Until next time, remember that you are more than a pastor. Saying yes to God's call doesn't mean you have to say yes to feeling stuck, broke, or unfulfilled in your life and ministry. Let's work together and help you create the life, impact, and income that you were made for.